on nationwide protests. Trump's comments come after Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, accused Trump of encouraging agitators in a televised speech today. He also said Iran considers Trump a criminal. The BBC is reporting that Iran's supreme leader has for the first time publicly acknowledged that thousands of people were killed during recent protests. State and federal officials are monitoring weekend protests in Minnesota. Anti-ICE protests and counter-demonstrations are taking place in downtown Minneapolis today. Minnesota's Director of Public Safety is urging residents to avoid confrontation and focus on peaceful expression of their views.
I'm counting on Minnesotans. I'm counting on those who are going to be in attendance at those locations to keep the peace.
Commissioner Bob Jacobson warned that any acts of violence, damage to property, or threats to public safety won't be tolerated. Tensions have been high across the Twin Cities since last week's fatal shooting of Renee Good by an ICE agent. An active weather system continues across the United States. Lisa Taylor has more.
Widespread rain is expected from the Gulf Coast through the southeast, the Tennessee and Ohio valleys, and into the mid-Atlantic. Meanwhile, Sam Brock reports cold and snow is an issue for many.
Sheets of snow smothering cities from the heart of the Midwest to western New York. Similar scenes unfolding from Indiana to Pennsylvania.
In that area, snow totals have ranged from 17 to 24 inches in just the last 24 hours. I'm Lisa Taylor.
A new poll shows a majority of Americans are unhappy with the economy under President Trump. A poll by the Wall Street Journal found nearly 60% of those surveyed rated the economy as not so good or poor. Rob Martier, NBC News Radio.
This is Chicago's Progressive Talk, 820 AM, WCPT Willow Springs, and online at WCPT820.com, where facts matter. Stephanie Miller.
I get to say my favorite sentence in the entire world. Here comes Kathy Griffin, hero of democracy. Hello.
How are we going to do this? Because I know we're both going to want to talk at the same time because it's a love fest. I am so in love with you. You are so important and wonderful and funny and brilliant, and you are who I aspire to be.
When
I grow up, I want to be you.
No, you.
Stephanie Miller, weekday mornings, 8 to 11 on WCPT 820. You're listening to WCPT 820 because facts matter.
You are listening to Think Theory Radio.
Hello and welcome to Think Theory Radio, the show that brings you topics outside the mainstream realm of thought and ideas to make you think. And I'm your host, Damian Perdue, your guide on this modern ride of alchemical delights. And today I'm not joined by Paulie C, and filling in for him is Matt Byrne, or I don't know, Matty B. I don't know, I got to think of a Think Theory name for you.
Richard usually goes with Matty B.
Okay, Matty B. All right. I was thinking Byrne, though, is a good tie-in to today's topic, which is modern alchemy, because, you know, the ancient alchemists would use fire to create lead into gold.
For sure, yeah.
And, so today we're talking about modern alchemy, and not necessarily in terms of people who nowadays practice alchemy, but more so in the sense of science and fields of science, innovations, experiments nowadays that might parallel what the alchemists believed in, or what their work, their main goal, which they called the magnus opus, or the master work. And for them, it was always trying to achieve, you know, the philosopher's stone, the Lippus Philosophicorum. And that would be the ultimate goal, is you create this gem, this stone that could transmute anything into anything you wanted. But we all kind of know the typical lead into gold, you know, comparison or analogy. And there's a lot of different theories, though, about what the alchemists believed. And for those that don't know what alchemy is, it's an ancient art that kind of proto-chemistry, if you will. A lot of sciences, honestly, that it began in ancient Egypt. The name alchemy is an Arabic word. You know, basically means the either matter or the chemistries, or chemistry comes from chemi, and some believe that it comes from the original name for Kemet, which was the original name of Egypt, which meant black land or matter, also Chemia, which is the Greek for Egypt, the Greek word for Egypt. And it spread in the 7th century through the Islamic conquest, and there was an ancient alchemist named Habir ibn Hayyan, who also refined and developed techniques and theories such as mercury-sulfur theory of metals, and he wrote over 3,000 articles about alchemy, metallurgy, and all of this. And that's kind of where those manuscripts led into early medieval Europe, and that's where a lot of the early medieval European alchemists got their information from. There was kind of a huge generation gap between the ancient Egyptian alchemists and the European ones. A lot had to do with kind of with the Christian religion. There was a lot of suppression of it until it started to become a little bit more accepted in like the 14th, 15th century. But there is a lot of interesting, some people only think of it as, some kind of magic, like, take 2 eyes of newt and mix it with, an old man's hair and you make some concoction. But there really is a lot of what we know of through science and, different skills, artisan skills and different kind of techniques were originally started through the alchemists. I mean, they were assaying, which is determining the components of metal alloys, mining, they were doing metalworking, pigment and dye making, distilling, the production of ceramics started with them, the manufacture of medicines, and glass making. These were all things that the original alchemists were working on, including also to the in ancient China, which is also one of the main places where alchemy was really big.
Gunpowder, for sure.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, totally. Which, good or bad. Which actually is a good one to bring up because, a little later I wanted to tie in, the modern sense, kind of the good and the bad, because you always have the evil scientists or you had the crazy alchemists.
The mad scientist, if you will.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So that's a good one too, because when they made, the Chinese made gunpowder, they made it more for fireworks and like, this is a cool thing, fun. And then,
they didn't intend it to be used for mass destruction.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, of course, Marco Polo found it and brought it to Europe. Hey, we can blow stuff up with this. All right. But they also not just gunpowder, but they were using Chinese alchemy was the use of herbs and natural remedies, which is the basis of a lot of herbal medicines and natural treatments that are still practiced today in Chinese medicine. But also it's a multi-million-dollar industry with the alternative treatments and different kind of therapeutics. And these different natural remedies led to foundations for modern pharmaceutical industry as well. I mean, a lot of people don't know that like about 60% of modern pharmaceuticals are plant-based, and come from these ancient remedies. So I think there's a lot of, importance in what the work of the alchemists were doing and what it led into, into science. I mean, even some of the original Isaac Newton, who's considered, pretty much the father of modern physics, he also dabbled in alchemy. So did Albert Magnus, who was another big-time scientist, and many others. It was, at that time in the 1700s, it was still kind of accepted, though it wasn't, you couldn't get a degree in the university in alchemy, but it wasn't frowned upon to study it and kind of learn from it.
It wasn't a completely shunned science.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of a more modern thing because we think of it in terms of, trying to do something that's impossible, like turn lead into gold or create an elixir of life or, kind of rejuvenating youth and, immortality and all these different things. But there's a lot of different theories in what their formulas were. Some think that these descriptions of, using a dragon tail and, the rays of the sun were encoded messages because a lot of times the alchemists didn't want other alchemists or the church or whoever else to find out what they're working on. So they would kind of create codes that actually represented real elements, represented actual minerals and crystals and things that you could use. Another little tidbit that I found out, which I didn't know, but the person considered to be the first alchemist was a woman. Her name was she went by several names: Mary the Jewess, Mary the Prophetess, Maria the Copt, and she was a Jewish woman in ancient Egypt, and she's one of the earliest known, at least from the works of history, which goes back to Zosimos of Panopolis around 300 CE, and he was a Greek historian and also an alchemist himself, and he wrote about her works. Now, she actually she incorporated different attributes like descriptions of metals such as bodies, souls, and spirits. She believed that metals had two different genders, and by joining the two genders together, a new entity could be made. But she also did really important things in her inventions, which are still used today. So the tripikos, which was a kind of alembic with 3 arms that was used to obtain substances purified by distillation, and it's still used today in chemistry labs.
Wow.
Yeah. She also created the kerotakis, which was a device used to heat substances used in alchemy and to collect vapors. It's an airtight container with a sheet of copper on its upper side. And this is where the sealed containers led to the term hermetically sealed, which is based on the legend Hermes Trismegistus,
Yes.
or Hermes thrice great, 3 times great. And he's the legendary alchemist, supposed author of the Emerald Tablet, which was supposedly this code, the code of the universe, all the secrets of the universe inscribed in a tiny emerald.
Just one emerald.
Just one little emerald, right? And this had a profound influence on a lot of the medieval alchemists, and supposedly he was a kind of a conjunction of Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth, and that's where that comes from. But what I thought was an interesting parallel, let's say the Emerald Tablet, right? So you have this jewel, this emerald, and you have supposedly the secrets of the universe encoded on this, right? What would be the modern parallel to that? What do you think?
I'm thinking something like possibly the internet, being stored all in one seemingly small container.
Close.
Okay.
That's a good one too.
Yeah.
I was thinking the microchip.
Ah, yes.
Because a microchip actually is what you use like crystal to make it and silicone, right? And
that's right, yeah.
And then you encode all this information on a tiny little tablet, essentially.
To be used wherever and whenever.
Yeah, and you could. Think about the Human Genome Project, where you mapped the whole, human genome and the idea of the DNA, and imagine going back in time and talking to an alchemist and saying, and showing him a microchip and saying, I have all the information of how a human life is created, how life on Earth, and how it's all connected in this little thing, You
could blow so many minds if you just had the power to travel back in time and show them, mundane things. Yeah.
Maybe someone did, and that was what the Emerald Tablet was.
That's quite possible.
You never know. But no, I thought that's an interesting parallel of, where a lot of what they wanted to do has kind of come to fruition, but in different ways, Actually, talking about DNA, there is and recorded information. I don't know if you've heard about this, but they have created a DNA cassette.
I've heard about this, yeah.
Yeah, where they're using a data storage method using synthetic DNA molecules embedded in a cassette tape. And it allows for ultra-dense, long-term archiving of digital information like music, videos, text, in a small physical format, with the recent prototype holding billions of songs. Billions! And featured automated reading, writing for massive data centers, and, just translates, the typical ones and zeros into A, T, C, G, which are the bases of DNA. Which I thought was fascinating, using DNA code to store information.
Definitely, and it's something that if you have a Walkman, that's gonna take you a while to get through all those songs. Yeah.
Who needs Spotify anymore? You have a DNA cassette.
You have the DNA cassette for life.
And I wonder what can you play that on? Can you play that on a Walkman, or do you need a special DNA Walkman.
If Apple's any good analogy, they're going to sell you a special DNA cassette player that you need to use in order to play the DNA cassette.
Yeah, right, exactly. Oh man, that'd be great. Let's see what else we got here. We got a little time. So in my own personal life, that was one of the reasons I came up with this topic. Was years ago, and Matt, you don't know this about me, but I'm a hip hop artist. I used to be a recording artist. I'm still a graffiti artist.
Wow, yeah.
And back in the day, when I made my first record, actual like vinyl record, I went into a space that was here in Chicago studio that had an old vinyl mastering equipment, where it actually recorded the track into a master vinyl in order to print out all the other records, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting in the studio with this guy, and he starts telling me how it works, okay? And you take a blank piece of vinyl record, and he puts it on which looks like a regular turntable, but it has a ruby, little tiny ruby, connected to like a kind of vacuum tube that would suck out the excess vinyl that you're cutting in. And you use that to cut in the grooves of the record, which is essentially a mirror image of your sound frequency, right? Which is whatever you recorded. And as he's doing this, he's like, yeah, you're actually, that vinyl is, made from petroleum, which what he was saying, dead dinosaur bones, right? Now, it's not actually dinosaur bones. It's like a misnomer, but it's actually dead plankton. It's still some kind of dead fossilized stuff. But I just thought it was interesting when he said that. I'm thinking, okay, this is straight up alchemy, because you have one is using a tiny gemstone, a crystal, okay? And then he's cutting into matter, like that once was living matter, and implementing sound frequency into that. So you're taking these, because it's essentially what alchemy was you take different elements, you put them together to create something new.
Yeah, it sounds like a transmutation to me.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Especially if you think about the fact that you're putting actual, a frequency, a sound, your recorded voice, and kind of creating like an immortal version of yourself. So you're talking about immortality, you're talking about transmutation, and I thought about that. Imagine obviously the vinyl has to survive, right? And people have to have something to play it on for me to remain immortal. But in essence, that's kind of what it was. So that first sparked that kind of idea of like, whoa, what is the modern alchemy, modern magic, and not like, not in terms of, like a Wiccan or something like that manner, but something more scientific, So I've always been fascinated with that, and also just kind of, think of it in terms of modern technology or other ways that, you kind of utilize. My mind, I always thought of, as an odd one, but like cigarettes.
Yeah, really?
Because I just thought about how like the cigarette industry kind of, created a lot of addicts based upon the kind of like the crystallization of like tobacco, and I don't know, it's just like
they cast a spell in
exactly
some ways.
Right. Yeah. So I just thought of that as like, you have these kind of like magic sticks that turn people into zombies. No.
Going back to what you were talking about records and discs, the thing that comes to mind is the golden disc, Sound to Space.
Yeah,
that was our message to the stars.
That's true.
And we sent it out at, I believe, 33 1/3 RPMs per minute.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, that's the Carl Sagan, the golden record.
That's right.
There's some good. I want to say there's a James Brown song in there. Right. I think so. Yeah. Possibly John Coltrane. I know there's like several like different music. I think he put some like tribal music on there.
Yeah.
And then also with recordings of like the human body and all the
children saying hello in various languages.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
There are versions of that available online. It's kind of a trippy listen because it's our communications to extraterrestrials, if there are any out there.
Right. And I always thought that was interesting too, because, obviously at the time that was the technology they had. So you assume like some advanced civilization would know how to use it.
Yeah. Maybe that goes to show, you go back to the alchemy, that maybe this form, the record, is kind of, could be a universal standard for, sending out sound and music. Hopefully it is.
Yeah, I would hope so. I mean, at least I would think if anything they could, since it is, I could see, it's kind of making sense to me now when in terms of a record, because you can see the grooves embedded. So if you understand sound, you would probably, if you're an advanced civilization, you would know that, there's some kind of frequency embedded in here, and you would figure out, if you didn't have a record or some kind of device to read it. Where if it was like a cassette or, a microchip, who knows if they would, you can't look at it and understand what it is as opposed to a record. So
yeah, I don't know if many extraterrestrials are driving, like an old Honda Civic that's got a cassette deck.
Yeah.
No, they got to have something more modern. And I guess something that has kind of stood the test of time. The 33 1/3 microgroove record.
Oh yeah.
Just been around.
It's been around, and it's kind of come back. It's become popular again.
For sure, yeah.
I actually saw a little animation. It was actually like an AI animation, but it was of an alien on some planet going to a record store, in his planet, and he's digging through the records, and he finds the gold record, and he takes it home and he puts it on. He has some, special player that can turn it into like visual representation too. So he's sitting there watching it, and he's seeing, and they're showing you like human history and all the different people singing, and he's like watching it, and he starts kind of crying and stuff.
Wow.
And it was pretty deep.
That's pretty cool. Actually,
it's probably one of the coolest like AI things I've ever seen. So
using AI for good for once.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes. And I was thinking about that record. We were talking about like kind of the transmutation of it, and similar with now everything is more digital. You're recording, but you still have that similar effect, like we said with the microchip. You're embedding this kind of, you're taking something, turning it into something else, and embedding it in such a small little piece of equipment or crystal, which is pretty fascinating. All right, we got to take a quick break. If you want to give us a call, hit us up at 773-763-9278. That's 773-763-WCPT. We'll be back with more Think Theory Radio right after this.
This is a WCPT Civil Rights Snapshot. Most people believe that the most historic thing the Pittsburgh Pirates did in 1971 was win the World Series. However, history was made by the Pirates back in September by starting an all-black lineup, the first in Major League Baseball history, 24 years after Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier. Despite being a historic event, it largely went unnoticed as the newspapers were on strike and the radio broadcast drew little attention to the event, not even mentioning it until the second inning, and the teams themselves not even knowing they had made history. The Pirates won that game 10-7. Rennie Stennett, Gene Clines, Roberto Clemente, Willie Stargell, Manny Sanguillen, Dave Cash, Al Oliver, Jackie Hernandez, and Doc Ellis pitching. All these men made history that day and helped lead the Pirates to win the 1971 World Series. And outfielder Roberto Clemente became the first Latin American player to win the World Series MVP award. Please stay vigilant about our civil rights. The fight is never over.
We're here at Menards Bag Sale, asking shoppers what they're putting in the bag to get 15% off.
Paint, batteries, tools, toilet paper, extension cords, grocery items,
hardware for my cabinet,
snack items, crackers, and some canned goods stuff.
Shop vac supplies,
toothpaste, cereal, coffee, dog treats. I've got a lot of stuff to grab.
The list goes on, but the sale ends January 24th. Hurry in for Menards 15% off bag sale. See store for complete details.
Save big money at Menards.
Alexa, play WCPT.
WCPT from TuneIn.
Welcome back to Think Theory Radio. This is Damien, and today we're talking about modern alchemy. What modern science techniques, innovations, experiments mirror or possibly fulfill what the ancient alchemists were trying to do? Like immortality, transmutation, all the different wonderful sciences. And, it's interesting. So one of the main things about, alchemy and what we know about the history of it and the the kind of goal, the pursuit, or the stereotype of it was always they wanted to turn lead into gold, which is like the most impossible thing to do. You can't do it. Well, can you? Scientists, or I should say quantum physicists, have actually turned lead into gold. Using a particle accelerator at CERN, the Large Hadron Collider, researchers fired lead atoms at one another. Rather than hitting each other, they just slightly missed, and their interactions created a high energy pulse. This led to 3 protons being ejected from the lead atoms, making gold. Overall, they only made 29 trillionths of a gram of gold. Not quite enough to make a nice ring or a lucky charm. But through this, physicists can learn more about how particles can interact and change. And it also only lasted a fraction of a second before it was obliterated. But still pretty cool. It actually did turn lead into gold, which I thought was pretty good example of this modern alchemy. But I was thinking about the different kind of ways that the world we live in today, like mirrors what was going on then. And I was thinking of mostly in terms of scientific experiments and quantum physics, different kind of, these type of categories. But I didn't know that Carl Jung believed in the alchemy of the mind. And this is another interesting interpretation. Like I was saying, how some have said the ancient alchemist texts were actually just codes for different kind of elements that you would use in an experiment. He actually believed, and this was after he was, and people that know he's a famous psychologist, but he realized that his patients were dreaming of the same symbols found in ancient alchemical texts, like the Red Lion or the Chemical Wedding. And Jung argued that alchemy wasn't actually about chemistry at all, that it was a projection of the human subconscious. He believed that transmuting lead into gold was an esoteric code for individuation, the process of turning a heavy, unformed personality into a golden. You turn me now. Hello? You turn into a golden, enlightened self, which is kind of very similar to what the alchemists believed themselves. They believed, that their work was heavily tied into spirituality and ascension, and that doing the great work, as they called it, the further you got along to creating a philosopher's stone, you were purifying your soul as well. So I thought it was an interesting parallel with what Carl Jung's theory is that, that it wasn't actually about trying to turn lead into gold. It was more about turning yourselves, about healing, about, wholeness and wellness,
becoming a new person in the process. Yeah,
exactly. So I thought that was a cool little analogy for what that was. But so we were talking about, we brought up microchip and like Silicon Valley being kind of this modern transmutation alchemy labs, and this is if you took, essentially you take silicon, which is sand, quartz. And through that process of intense heat, the burn, and doping, which is like adding impurities, you transform it into microchip. So you have this base matter, sand, transformed into something that you can think, process information, and hold collective knowledge of humanity. You literally breathe spirit, intelligence into stone.
It's interesting you mentioned the ruby earlier as being sort of, and it's not necessarily glass, but it's sort of this clear substance similar to what sand turning into glass. There's this kind of this ancient idea of holding something inside of a clear natural object.
Yeah, exactly. And even ruby itself was a huge thing in ancient alchemy. And the red glass, the ruby glass, it was invented by alchemists. This was what they used as a gold colloid. And and mixed it in, and that's how they created the red color in glasswork. Wow. Yeah, the raspberry red gold ruby glass. And I guess this was an alchemist named Johann Kunkel, who was hired by Emperor Rudolph II, and that's where the red ruby glass and some of those the glassware still exists. Wow. So I thought that was pretty cool. Let's see what else we have. I was talking a little bit about the emerald tablet, right? So The tablet describes a process where one must separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross. To an ancient alchemist, that meant purifying a physical substance. But the tablet also says its power is complete if it be turned into earth. And this suggests that information, which is the subtle, must be successfully embedded into physical matter, which is the gross, to create a miracle. And this is what these kind of the next modern examples do. And we were talking about the digital age. But what about CRISPR? So people aren't familiar with CRISPR. CRISPR, Cas9 is the digital editing tool that the scientists use nowadays to try to figure out, using the human genome and editing different, DNA aspects, trying to figure out if you can remove disease or implement new changes, creating new life forms even, Now like we were talking about what's the mad scientist versus, the do good. It's kind of similar too of you could have one who's using it to kind of end disease, and then there's the other one who wants to like clone humans.
Make homunculus slaves.
Exactly, yeah. And so if the transmutation of it would be, instead of changing lead into gold, you're changing the DNA code like A, C, G, and T, the base pairs of DNA, and editing the code of life. You're transmuting a body prone to disease into one that is resistant to it. And the Hermes, his motto, as above, so below. In this term, the above is the digital sequence on a computer screen, or the information, the spirit. The below is the living cell or the matter. And by changing the above, we force the below to follow suit. What I also find, very similar to that, it's a broad description, right? As above, so below. Some say, well, he just meant they believe that the sky and water were the same, which in a sense you do have water in the sky as well. But I think of it as, if you think of the macro and the micro, of matter to quantum physics, right? Or the similarities between how the universe operates and how the quantum mechanics of matter itself work. So as above, so below. If you dig, the farther you go down into the quantum realm, you will see the parallels between between the space and the universe. It's kind of like if, we think of ourselves as these physical bodies, but we're all just, this vibrating matter. And then when you go down, if you had an electron microscope and you could go dig down, deep down, the farther you go into the atomic structure, the more space there is. So it's very similar. If you were to open up an atom, if you could see inside an atom, the way the electrons spin around the nucleus and everything, the space between them is massive. It's like essentially like the solar system. They're not all clumped up together in there. There's a lot of space. There's a lot of like free flowing electrons bouncing around all over the place. So I like that kind of parallel between the quantum physics and the universal realm. But also you could get into a whole thing of how the cosmic web kind of mirrors the neurons in the brain. There's a whole other realm of that as above, so below thing.
And they're all connected in some way. The solar systems, the atoms, similar, shapes.
Oh yeah,
the
shapes.
Yeah.
And that was like the whole, Platonic thing, and not only Plato, but a lot of the original, even Isaac Newton, all believed that there was, these kind of geometric shapes that made up matter itself, right? And not only that, but to your point too, if you think of like our connection between stars, what are stars? Are these crucibles that just created all the particles and elements that are in our body, right? It's like Carl Sagan, would bring up Carl Sagan again. We are stardust, right? So there is that connection too, as above, so below.
Fascinating. It's really interesting.
And then there's digging into another version of the Emerald Tablet would be like large language models, or AI, the digital prima materia. And that's what the alchemist spoke of, which was a chaotic, formless first matter from which everything is created. Another parallel to the Big Bang and everything. The refinement, modern AI training, is a literal act of separating the subtle from the gross. Engineers take the gross matter of the entire internet, like you were talking about earlier, trillions of words of chaotic human noise and boil it down into using massive heat, which are server farms, and mathematical filters. And the Philosopher's Stone, which emerges as subtle weights and biases model that can speak, reason, and create. Like the Philosopher's Stone, which was said to penetrate every solid thing, AI is now penetrating every industry and facet of human thought, turning raw data into golden insights.
Yeah.
Which I also thought there is another connection between AI and another aspect of alchemy. But I don't know if I should get into... I guess, you know what, we'll get into it now because I don't want to end on a bad note. Because I was thinking, I brought it up earlier, like, what's the bad side of it? We can bring up all the good elements, nanotechnology, the internet, the microchip. But what are kind of the bad parts, right? Like the shadow alchemy, the dark arts. So you'd have like nuclear fission or the false transmutation where... And, the alchemist dream was to change one element to another. In 1941, physicists actually succeeded in turning mercury into gold using a particle accelerator. But the process was so energy intensive, it was useless for making money. And like I just mentioned earlier, they did it at CERN as well. The shadow alchemy of it would be the nuclear weapons are the ultimate dark transmutation. We take the uranium-238 base matter and transmute it into the plutonium-239, an element that essentially does not exist in nature, right? And you specifically, exactly, created by a man to create a chain reaction of total destruction.
Yeah.
There's actually a really good book that one of our listeners put me up on early when I first started doing this show. It's called Morning of the Magicians by Louis Berger and another author, I forget his name, but it's two French guys. They wrote it back in the late 50s, it came out in the early 60s. It's kind of like the occult esoteric Bible. If you're into that stuff, you want to get it because it's
sure, yeah.
And it's very similar to what I'm talking about. They call it fantastic realism, and they kind of get into, and I like the way they do it because they bring up all these crazy topics and they're saying, hey, look, we're just putting it out there. We're not telling you to believe this. We're just saying, here's what we have found. We've dug up this info. But they had a whole chapter about, did the alchemists know about nuclear fusion and chain reactions and all this? Is it possible that they had learned and created that, back then, and we just don't have that, it was all buried and hidden and stuff,
Or if they had somewhat, theories on it, but just they didn't have the knowledge to flesh it out.
Yeah, or the technology.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's similar to like Nikola Tesla, who he had a ton of inventions that we're using now. And he talked about back then, he was like, I have all these ideas, but modern technology is just not up to what I need.
And the same with Leonardo da Vinci.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of his designs that he wrote blueprints for, but never actually got around to, making them due to limitations of his own, just surroundings.
Yeah, but he like the concept of a helicopter before, but obviously he didn't have the proper technology to create that. And there's a ton of stuff that Leonardo which is also fascinating too when you think of that. People that can have that kind of foresight to think of, inventions that you can't even create because you just don't even have the technology to do. Like what that's like a whole other. I don't even know how I would approach that, but that's a good show topic of. What is someone thinking? Because we think of now that we have everything, right? Like we're so advanced. We have all the technology, that we have the CRISPR, we have, AI, we have all this technology. We can pretty much make anything. And what would be, the future, goal to create something that we don't have the technology for now that might be created,
It's like explaining the internet to someone from, maybe 1960. It's just such a vastly confusing topic if you don't already have the means to understand what it is to see it in front of you and to say, oh, that's what that is. Oh, it's just a network of interconnected computers. That could be a very and then what's a computer to someone in 1920
Exactly. And then here's another back to like kind of the bad alchemy part. what about forever chemicals or PFAs, right? So this is, one thing the alchemists were obsessed with was creating incorruptible substances, something that can't be broken down, never decay, rust, or change. So, in the mid-20th century, chemists created PFAs, or per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And these are, you could say modern elixirs. And this is used in everything from nonstick pans to firefighting foam. And they're defined by the strongest bond in organic chemistry, which is carbon-fluorine. Now, the problem is, and this is kind of where it leads the incorruptible substance, is that they create these chemicals that never break down. And they have leached into below the soil and water, and now are in the blood of nearly every human on Earth. We're not going to get it, microplastics, but, but so essentially it was an alchemical tincture that has stained the entire planet.
So they were successful.
They were successful. They made an incorruptible substance. Although I have read some, not to leave it on such a downer, but I have read that they have working, of course, nature. I feel like there's like so many elements of nature that can save us. And they have, I forget if it was fungi or not, but they have found something in nature that actually can break down PFAs.
I've heard of that too, yeah.
So hopefully they'll get to that. And now here's another quick one before we go to break. Deep fakes. We were talking about the homunculus, right? So the concept of the homunculus, alchemists were trying to create a version of a human, or they like a tiny artificial human in a jar using base biological materials, but one that had no soul, right? So if you think of generative AI and deep fake are kind of the modern homunculus, right?
Definitely.
Where you have this base matter of digital pixels and noise through the fire of the GPU, like we brought up. And then we create a person that looks and sounds real but has no soul or physical presence.
Although sometimes if you look closely and you listen, you can definitely tell that thing does not have a soul.
Yeah. Oh, no, I know. Yeah. Exactly. And that's like, but also the concept of the illusion, the truth into illusion, utilizing it to disinform people, to trick people. It has like a dark arts kind of vibe to it.
It does,
like
evil alchemy,
black magic, like it's not using it to just make a fun, AI video of an alien playing a human record, but it's like using it to make politicians say stuff they never said, or who knows. And this is, we're at the very beginning of it, and some of them are hard to tell. The AI ones, but some of the deep fakes are really good. And now they're doing all these crazy ones where you have like
Grok has been making some.
Yeah.
Grok might be chief magician of evil sorcery. Yeah.
I think it's funny, too, that Grok, like, people ask it about its creator, Elon Musk, and it's like, he doesn't seem like a good guy.
Like he's wise beyond his years.
The student taking out the master. All right, we got to take another quick break. When we come back, we'll get into a couple more examples of modern alchemy here on Think Theory Radio right after this.
Tom Hartman.
Autocrats generally, particularly those autocrats who have narcissistic personality disorder and are sociopaths, as is, in my opinion, Trump, typically do not tolerate high-profile people around them. They want to be the star of the show, and that's certainly been the history of Donald Trump. The only people that he will tolerate around him are people who, when he says, kiss my ass, they fall to their knees.
The Tom Hartman Radio Program, weekdays 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. on WCPT 820, where facts matter.
WCPT 820 will be hosting a candidate forum for the 3 leading candidates for Illinois' open United States Senate seat in the Democratic primary on February 6th.
Please join us at the Plumbers Hall at 1340 West Washington in Chicago, or listen to the live broadcast.
Representative Raja Krishnamurthy, Representative Robin Kelly, and Illinois Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton will be discussing their stances on the issues and making their case for your vote.
WCPT hosts Patty Vasquez, Richard Chu, and of course Jonas Esposito will be moderating the forum.
To attend in person, go to heartlandsignal.com/WCPT820 and register. We'll have limited seats available, so please register early.
Meet the leading Senate Democratic candidates at a free WCPT Live Candidate Forum at Plumbers Union Hall, Local 130 on Washington Street in Chicago, Friday, February 6th.
The forum starts at 1 p.m. and is sponsored by Plumbers Union Local 130.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Welcome back to Think Theory Radio. Today we're talking about modern alchemy. How does the modern sciences parallel ancient alchemy, and how they have done everything the alchemists ever wanted. And we left it a little bit on a sour note. The dark arts, the black alchemy of modern technology. But here, bring it back into positivity. There's a company named UBQ Materials that is supposedly using, they call it the most climate positive material available today. And what they've developed is a process to take generic waste that would otherwise be put in a landfill and turn it instead into a useful thermoplastic. So in other words, instead of using virgin oil to make base plastic, they can make it out of all the banana peels, greasy pizza boxes, plastic films, and packaging materials in your kitchen garbage bin. So they're kind of like transmuting your waste into thermoplastic.
Absolutely.
You know, which I think that's digressing a little bit from the alchemy side of it, but just thinking about, how to try to kind of get fighting against climate change and pollution. These kind of experiments, these kind of products, I feel like should get so much more focus, should be talked about so much more, whether it's on the news or online or whatever. I think it's so much like doom and gloom, and everyone just thinks that, no one's working on anything positive. But there are a lot of companies out there that are trying to do products like that, whether it's creating bricks from fungi and kind of, living tissue, DNA cassettes, whatever else it is, that it has a positive impact instead of just making more plastic.
Definitely. It sounds very Gandalf to me, as opposed to like a Sauron or Saruman, who might be, using grok for misdeeds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you could go on and on with probably the bad side of, obviously, we brought up like nuclear weapons and the PFAs and all the different, the breakdown of that stuff. Let alone just, I've always thought of, I was talking about kind of what is, like the kind of, simile or metaphor of alchemy. And I've always thought that oil in itself, the whole oil industry, obviously, which seems kind of evil in a lot of, and especially in this day and age. But also if you kind of think of it in terms of like, if you took away your knowledge of it in the modern sense, right? If you told somebody, we're going to dig deep down into the earth and bring out this black sludge and turn it into power and fire, it sounds like something, they probably would think, well, that's the devil's blood,
And that there is also like this like coven of men who make billions upon billions of dollars upon it, and they gather in secrecy and they talk with our leaders, and that's very alchemist, borderline witchcraft.
And you just reminded me of a photo, and this is from I don't even like saying his name on the show, so we all know who the president is. But
Beelzebub,
Yes, the homunculus.
Yes.
In his first term, I don't know if you remember this, but there was this meeting with all of the, it's like the United Arab Emirates, like all the oil magnates and all them, like in somewhere in Dubai or wherever, and they're all standing around that glowing orb thing. I mean, come on, that looks like some dark arts. Occults, you know what I mean? What were they doing there?
Yeah, the look on his face. It always reminds me of Ash from Evil Dead.
Yes,
it's just not fully aware of the level of magic and mischief that's coming his way. Yeah,
that's a good analogy. All right, let's not end it on a bad note. So we go. What about? Let's see. I had found. We talked about dark alchemy. What about white alchemy or good alchemy or whatever? And that would be kind of the process of restoration and healing. And in alchemy was known as albedo or albedo, which meant the whitening, where the blackened burnt material is washed and purified into a state of light. And so this would be like bioremediation. So if you have like oil spills and PFAs or the corrupted tinctures, bioremediation is the alchemical filter. The transmutation of it would be scientists use specific extremophile bacteria and fungi that we were talking about earlier, our old friends from the Wood Wide Web, those playing at home, to eat toxic waste. The process would be these organisms take gross pollutants like heavy metals or crude oil, and through their internal metabolic fire, transmute them into harmless substances like water and CO2. And this is the literal transformation of death back into life-sustaining soil.
Wow.
Which is always interesting thing to me about fungi is it's a living, it's one of the oldest things on Earth. We're deeply tied. Our DNA is really closely connected to fungi. But it lives off of death. It brings life from death.
Yes. Yeah.
Nuclear fusion, the true philosopher's stone, maybe. Fission is the bomb, right? Breaking things apart, leaving toxic waste. Fusion is about bringing things together, mimicking the above, the sun, with the below here on Earth. The transmutation is taking isotopes of hydrogen, the most basic element, and fuse them into helium. The result is the process releases massive amounts of energy with zero carbon emissions and no long-lived radioactive waste. It's the infinite light the alchemists dreamed of and a way to power the world without staining the Earth. And there actually, there's been a lot of really amazing advances with nuclear fusion, especially in China. They've really been working on, I think China, and I want to say in France, there were 2 recent experiments where they were able to sustain a fusion reaction for minutes, like a high energy burst. Which, it's, and it within years, then some people say, well, what's minutes? It's nothing. But if you look at how far they've gone from just a couple of years ago where they could only do it for seconds, they're progressing in it.
Yeah.
And people wondering, well, what's the difference? There would be no plutonium. There would be no radioactive waste, which is what led to the nuclear bomb.
And that's really interesting. You mentioned that as above, so below, both using fusion. I'm just curious. There's no, as far as we know, there's no runoff from fusion. It's just pure energy.
As far as we know, I mean, I think if there is any runoff, it's a very minute amount. You couldn't use it for anything bad, and it wouldn't be a massive amount of toxic waste just sitting around, So it's kind of. I know there's a lot of people against nuclear energy. I'm kind of on the fence of it only because, what I've known of it through the years has been the bad side of it, But if nuclear fusion could become a thing where it's game changing, if you can create a minimally wasteful energy source, which is a massive power source. I mean, if you think of like a nuclear reactor and how much how many homes and how many cities it can power just off of one, as opposed to having, a million wind turbines or other different kind of, ways to power things. But so we'll see. We'll see where that goes. And let's see what else we got. The lab-grown organs is the homunculus of healing.
Yeah.
Instead of the deep fake, modern medicine is working on 3D bioprinting.
Wow.
And so the transmutation of it would be take patients' own base cells or stem cells and print them into scaffolding, creating a living, functional heart or kidney, which they've already been doing. I think they actually did one of the first 3D printed heart transplants too in recent, last year or so. The result is solves the alchemical problem of rejection because the organ is made of the patient's own essence. The body accepts it as gold. It is the realization of the elixir of life.
Yeah.
You know?
And hypothetically, if you want to look at it in a medieval sense, the idea of regenerating your organs is almost synonymous with, well, if your organs are always, coming back, eternal life in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, exactly. I mean, think of, we're just on the cusp of it, but if you think of in the future where everyone has imagine having like an organ printing 3D, 3D printer in your home, Yeah. Oh, I cut my finger off, chopping wood, just regrow
a
it.
new one. Yeah.
Exactly, or something more dire like that, like, oh, my kidney's failing, just,
You get into murky water with a brain.
Yes.
If they could if that's even somewhere in the realm of possibility, who knows?
I'm gonna have to dig into that. I wonder if I'm sure there's one, people that are at least attempting to do it. I mean, I know that, I don't know if you know of like the brain organoids that they've created. So they've created these little mini brains in science labs. And they call them brain organoids.
Huh.
And they've actually, in one experiment, they've linked up a bunch of different brain organoids and created a computer from it.
Wow.
Because, the human brain the processing speed is insane. It's still no computer can surpass it yet, right? Until the AI reaches singularity. But no, they've created these brain organoids, which is kind of like on that, precipice of, is this amoralistic? Like, should we be recreating brains in a lab? And then also, they say, of course, the science, oh, no, these are not, they have no kind of
consciousness,
but how do we really know that? And then if you're just kind of creating brains, trapping them in a lab to like turn them into a computer and do your bidding,
It's a pretty dark reality if you are that brain. Yeah.
Exactly. Some other like quick examples of modern alchemy would be like nanotechnology, manipulating atoms to change a material's building blocks, materials science, creating new materials with unique properties like chameleon metals or catalysts, metallurgy. We talked about how the alchemists created it, but you extract and refine metals like lithium for batteries, and modern take on, turning base metals into valuable ones. Electrolysis, or using electricity to break down compounds like turning salt into sodium or water into hydrogen and oxygen, demonstrating elemental change.
The good wizards are at work.
Yes, they're out there. I had to end it on a positive note. All right, I want to thank everybody for listening. Thanks, Matt, for filling in.
No problem.
We'll be back again next Saturday and every Saturday, 6 to 7 p.m. right here on WCPT 820 Think Theory Radio.
Mind Over Matters.
Dr. Amy Harris Nuwan. As you know, this show is about challenging you to think differently, to make different choices in your life, to take action, to create positive outcomes in your life. So